A police tent now marks the location where our body was discovered. The main road is roughly 50 yards away. This region is referred to as a nature reserve in the local community. A private housing estate is right next to it. Dog walkers and joggers love the woods themselves. In the United Kingdom, a woman was reported missing on May 31st, 2007, in Walton on T.S. Sur. No one had heard from Kate Beagley, and she had failed to show up for work. Her father decided to visit her house to see if she was all right because he knew she had gone out the previous evening, but she wasn't there. She hadn't shown up for an appointment either. Kate's father reported her missing to the police because he knew that this was not like her at all, and more than just the police were looking for her. In the hopes that someone would know something, Kate's friends posted missing persons posters throughout the neighborhood and conducted their own searches. They created a group on Facebook, which was still very young at the time, to share information and keep people informed. Kate Beagley, 32, was characterized as a unique, devoted individual who was constantly joyful and smiling. When you needed her, you could rely on her. She was employed by a FTSE 100 company, and her outstanding work ethic earned her a senior position with the gas company Centrica as a national compliance manager. She loved to travel, had a large circle of friends, and had a genuine spirit of adventure. Even though this was a peaceful area with little activity, certainly not much crime, she was also industrious and would never simply vanish without informing others of her whereabouts. The kidnapping and murder of Millie Dowler served as the backdrop for the police's investigation. In March 2002, 13-year-old schoolgirl Millie Dowler was kidnapped in Walton-on-Thames. A few months later, her remains were discovered. As the hunt for her killer continued over the years, it would take years before he was apprehended, and he was already serving a prison sentence for 2 previous murders and 1 attempted murder. Her murder captivated the public and made national headlines. Levi Belfield was convicted on June 23, 2011, of kidnapping and killing Millie Dowler. Although Kate was missing at the time, he was given another life sentence without the possibility of parole. The police needed to reassure the public and obtain the answers that so many were seeking because Millie's killer had not yet been apprehended. Then a lot of people were worried about something that happened. Though they didn't sound like her, Kate's friends had been getting text messages from her phone. It is common for people to have distinct speech and typing patterns when using text messages. These messages from Kate's phone used words and phrases she wouldn't have used and didn't follow that pattern. A second phone was discovered by the police during their search of her house. Investigators from the Missing Persons Unit examined the phone more closely and chose to contact some of the numbers on it, including one belonging to a man she had gone out with on a date the day before she was reported missing. Her friends didn't know much about him, other than that he was named Carl Taylor. The two had met at a club in central London a few weeks prior, so it's possible she had returned to his place, but her family said it was unlikely. So who was this Carl? He had a criminal record, but nothing that raised any red flags in 2002, having been found guilty of obtaining property by deception. In the same year, he attempted suicide by jumping off a bridge, but was talked down. Psychiatrists answered the phone at his mother's house after she pleaded with him to seek help. The two were found to have agreed in texts exchanged between them. Since meeting up within the first few hours of someone being reported missing is crucial for gathering evidence, the police decided to call the person's number because they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Unexpectedly, he responded, stating that she had dropped him off at Twickenham and that he had been the person she had met. This story didn't make sense, but he had boarded a bus to go home and hadn't seen her since. When they talked to his mother, she revealed that he had shown up in a brand new Volkswagen Golf that she didn't recognize early on the morning of May 31st, the day she was reported missing. He was cleaning it too. He gave a false explanation, saying that he had gotten it from a woman who needed it cleaned so she could take her kids to school. Kate was gone now, and it was her Volkswagen Golf. If he hadn't seen her after she dropped him off, why in the world would he have her car? And if there was a completely innocent explanation, why wouldn't he have told him right away when the police told him about the investigation into Kate's disappearance? It also turned out that he had given his mother some shopping vouchers out of the blue at 5:45 that morning, but they weren't his. They had come from Kate's glove box. He also sold what turned out to be Kate's phone to one of his friends, and he was even boasting about his new vehicle. Further investigations revealed that her car had been seen just before midnight on the 30th, as it was driven over Chiz Bridge in the opposite direction of where Kate lived. The driving was described as erratic, and a police officer had spotted it and logged a check with the police national computer. Carl Taylor, 27, was a former football coach and fitness instructor who had received martial arts training. He was strong and physically fit, so it would have been simple for him to subdue Kate. The police decided that they needed to bring Carl in for an interview. If this was all a misunderstanding and he had nothing to do with Kate's disappearance, this was his opportunity to explain. However, there was a problem. The man who had quickly answered his phone that morning was now completely silent, ignoring all attempts to reach him. When the police call, their number usually appears as no caller ID, meaning Carl likely knew who was trying to contact him. So the officers decided to try a different approach. They called him using a personal phone. Sure enough, Carl answered. He repeated the same story but was hesitant to provide details. The officers informed him that two of them would be traveling to London to take his statement, as his vague answers over the phone were not sufficient and did nothing to reassure them. Surprisingly, Carl then asked if they could meet him at a party he was planning to attend that night at a flat in Holland Park. It was a strange request. A woman he had just been on a date with had vanished, yet he was driving around in her car without a proper explanation and behaving as if nothing had happened. When the officers arrived at the party, they took Carl aside to speak with him in private. However, meeting him in person did not ease their concerns. He remained evasive and vague, refusing to give straight answers. As more guests arrived and the alcohol began to flow, the atmosphere became less than ideal for an interview. Carl's behavior also started to change. He became visibly irritable and increasingly annoyed. The officers began to worry about their safety and well-being. Although it was decided to arrest him and transport him back to Walton on HS, worries about the officers' safety persisted, so while they awaited their arrival, officers from the Metropolitan Police Force were called in as backups in case they were needed. The detective sergeant on the scene came up with an excuse to get Carl out of the flat and downstairs to their car. Unaware of what was happening, Carl followed them outside and got into the vehicle. Once inside, he was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Kate Beagley. He was taken back to Walton, placed in a cell, and the case was handed over to the major crime team, led by Detective Chief Inspector Mark Preston. Time was critical. They needed to question Carl urgently if they had any hope of finding Kate. However, despite their efforts, his story remained unchanged. With still no sign of Kate, the police made the decision to rearrest Carl Taylor, this time on suspicion of her murder. When interviewed again, he refused to speak. To every single question, he simply responded with no comment. The police obtained a court order to extend his detention, giving them more time to question him, but he still refused to cooperate. He would not explain why he had her car or why CCTV footage had captured him at a petrol station topping up fuel, bizarrely, only putting in 1 pound's worth of petrol. Although the evidence against him was largely circumstantial, it painted a troubling picture. The police needed something concrete, and they needed Carl to talk. He was sent back to his cell to reflect on everything that had been presented against him. On Sunday night, he was granted a phone call with his mother. Following this, the decision was made to conduct another interview. Detective Chief Inspector Preston, who had been awake for over 24 hours, finally decided to go home and rest. But as soon as his head hit the pillow, his phone rang. It was the station. It was the... Carl Taylor had not only confessed to murder, but also promised to take them to where he had left Kate's body. His confession was as cold-hearted as it was horrifying. He admitted that he had wanted her car and attacked her in an attempt to steal it. When she fought back, he repeatedly stabbed her. He told the police, "She pushed me away. She was grabbing me and I stabbed her in the throat. I constantly and consistently cut her in the neck because she was going for my face. However, the officers found his explanation difficult to believe. Carl was much stronger than Kate and trained in martial arts. He could have easily overpowered her without using a weapon. Why, then, had he resorted to such extreme violence? The police weren't convinced by his story. Carl claimed that he had taken Kate's body to a location near Watford in Hertfordshire. The police quickly contacted Hertfordshire officers for assistance. Given the gravity of the situation, a large-scale operation was put in place. They needed to ensure that Carl was filmed and recorded throughout the journey, as he was still under caution. They also had to take precautions to prevent any attempt at escape and to keep everyone safe. Late into the night, they began their journey to Watford, with Carl giving directions along the way. But was this going to be yet another deception? He eventually led them to a car park at a local nature reserve called Odyssey Woods. You could hardly see your hand in front of your face because it was dark and eerily silent. Carl exited and led the officers to a stinging nettle patch. At 3 a.m. that morning, the missing persons case was concluded when an officer went around the back, avoiding any obvious paths a murderer might have taken. After the discovery of Kate's nude body, the area was promptly roped off, and crime scene investigators began the laborious process of gathering and retrieving evidence. Kate was a devoted daughter, sister, granddaughter, godmother, and friend who was affectionate, considerate, trustworthy, loyal, and incredibly popular, according to a statement issued on behalf of her family, which included her parents, Alan and CLA, and her brother Guy. Everyone who knew Kate on a daily basis and in every manner will miss her. Many people were profoundly impacted by the flowers that were left at the crime scene. "I never met you, but I feel like I have known you for a lifetime," one message said. "My thoughts and prayers are with everyone who was fortunate enough to experience your friendship and love. Without you, the place is a sadder place." Due to her severe injuries and the fact that the heat had already caused decomposition, Kate needed to be identified using DNA in order to be officially recognized. Her body had been cleaned and her clothes taken off. Other than her body, Carl said he had wanted to cleanse her spiritually and leave her exposed to the stars. They conducted fingertip searches, but were unable to find Kate's belongings or the murder weapon. After dumping her body, it was later discovered that Carl Taylor had thrown the knife out of her car as he drove it down the motorway. Amazingly, the murder weapon and some of her clothing were discovered by the officers. These were also discovered, and some of the water bottles she always kept in her car had been used to wash her body. Her blood was also found on the knife. The police needed to locate Kate's car as it could hold crucial evidence. Carl eventually agreed to tell them where it was, stating that it was parked on an estate in London. Sure enough, when officers searched the area, they found the vehicle. The post-mortem examination revealed a horrifying catalog of injuries that Kate had suffered. She had been stabbed more than 30 times in the neck, face, and head. This devastating news was incredibly difficult for Kate's loved ones to process. They were overwhelmed with grief, struggling to come to terms with losing someone so dear in such a brutal manner, while also grappling with the many unanswered questions surrounding her death. As the investigation continued, Carl, who had previously refused to talk, finally agreed to take the police to the pub in Richmond Hill, where he and Kate had gone for their first date. Across the road from the pub, there was an embankment overlooking the River Thames, with several benches scattered along the area. Carl admitted that it was on one of these benches that he had launched his attack on Kate. When officers searched the location, they found traces of blood on the ground, the steps, and the handrails leading back toward the pub. The blood was tested, and heartbreakingly, it was confirmed to be Kate's. With all the evidence gathered, the decision was made to charge Carl Taylor with the murder of Kate Beagley. However, despite his confession and the overwhelming proof against him, he pleaded not guilty. He now claimed that he had acted in self-defense and that Kate had taken her own life. To strengthen their case, the police decided to revisit the nature reserve where Kate's body had been found. They hoped to uncover further clues, suspecting that this had been a sexually motivated murder. It was later revealed that while in prison, Carl had made friends with none other than Levi Belfield, the man who had killed Millie Dowler, though it was unknown at the time that he had also made friends with Mark Dixie, whose crime we covered on our episode of the murder of San Bowman. The police collected over 100 used condoms that were discovered in that area, and each one was tested, but none of them contained Carl's or Kate's DNA. Laura Richards, the former head of Scotland Yard's Homicide Prevention Unit, claimed that Levi B. Field and Mark Dixie had a strange relationship after being placed in joining cells at Beamarsh Prison. They later added Carl to their group and began burning prison psychologists with their pee and their tactics. She said that the three of them would stand trial within weeks of each other at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London, a historic building that has seen some of the most infamous and extraordinary trials in British criminal history. Now it was Carl Taylor's turn, and the public gallery was crowded with people who wanted to see justice done. Carl was still denying any wrongdoing. Carl had previously admitted to killing Kate, the prosecution reaffirmed, and the evidence supported this claim as well. According to the jury, Carl and Kate met at the CC Club in Piccadilly, central London, on May 18th and decided to go on a formal date in a few weeks. The pub in Richmond Hill was their choice. She didn't seem to be paying any attention to him during the date. One witness told the police, as soon as they sat down, the girl had her head down, texting on her mobile phone. He was the only one speaking to her. There was no conversation. She kept sending texts. When they left, she was still sending texts. They made their way to the embankment bench. He had a carving knife hidden up his sleeve and a pair of scissors with him. In his own defense, Carl Taylor would testify that Kate was a good-hearted and kind woman who was having difficulties and intended to take her own life. He claimed that although he had tried everything to prevent her, she was unable to inflict such severe injuries on herself without toppling over and losing consciousness. Carl was given a piece of paper that the prosecution had rolled up to resemble a knife. He instructed him to show the judge, jury, and court exactly how Kate had stabbed herself over 30 times in the face, head, and neck. He turned down the judge. Jars Forrester informed him that he was not in charge and that he had to follow instructions. It was said that his attempt to demonstrate how Kate had allegedly stabbed herself was embarrassing and absurd. He informed the court that she was pulling her hair, which caused her head to move, and prodding herself in the neck area. I just stood there in wonder, not knowing what to do. I knew she was dead. I was crying a lot. I gazed up at the sky while lying on the grass. When he was captured on camera pulling into the gas station and purchasing 1 gallon of gas, he then dragged her body to her car. During the trial, Kate's body was in the boot. Additionally, it would come to light that Carl had, in fact, written a letter from his cell at Staines Police Station to Kate's family. Carl is my name. I'm the man who spent Friday night with your daughter. In all honesty, my initial impression of her was that she was a good-hearted but somewhat unhappy girl. In any case, during the brief time I knew your daughter, I realized she was an angel. However, even though Katie is no longer with us, she continues to shine brightly in the night sky like a star. I may have taken your daughter's life, but we all know, some of us more than others, that her heart still beats in the goodness we bring into the world. Her soul lives on in the beautiful memories of her. My own life, in many ways, ended years ago, shattered by events that left my heart broken, but your lives continue. And with deep respect, Katie will never just be a memory. She will always be a reminder that angels do walk among us, even if sometimes they have to return to heaven. We live in a world where life is difficult for everyone, and those who try to embrace kindness are often rejected. There is no doubt that what I did was wrong. But ask yourself, whose life have I really taken? I don't expect that this letter will ease your pain. But as the birds sing and the flowers bloom in spring, remember Katie. Let the love you have for her, the love you always had and always will have, beat like a drum in your heart, just as it did when she first opened her eyes. Whenever you miss her, look at the stars, and I promise you, just as I have seen myself, she will be shining there, forever in your hearts. Remember, you have not lost her, just as she has not lost you. Sometimes You don't have to touch a flower to help it grow. The detectives who intercepted the letter decided not to show it to Kate's family. Less than 2 hours later, the jury retired to consider their verdict. Carl Taylor was found guilty by the jury. When it was announced that he had been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years to serve, the public gallery erupted in cheers. "I am convinced that this was a murder committed for financial gain," the judge informed him. "You went to meet this knife-wielding girl. All she was doing was trying to find friendship with you. You exploited that girl's weakness for your personal gain." "I didn't, Your Honor," but Judge Forrester went on. "Your use of the knife was premeditated and it was concealed on your person," Carl said, interrupting him. "After committing this heinous act, you ruthlessly removed her and covered up the body." Additionally, he described Carl as conceited, cunning, and extremely dangerous. According to one message, the area near her death is marked with flowers today. "We wish you were still on this side of the rainbow after the conviction, Kate, and we miss you." Outside of court, Kate's father spoke. "I speak for all of us when I say that our lives will never be the same again. Our family has been devastated, and life seems empty and meaningless without Kate. Now that the case is over, 7 detectives from Sur Police and a Metropolitan Police analyst were commended for their tireless work. Deputy Chief Constable Craig Denholm said that this difficult investigation involved 3 force areas and multiple scenes to secure a conviction, and that the offender received life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. The violence that Kate Eno committed in her final moments is the stuff of nightmares, and knowing how he had so coldly disposed of her body just makes it worse. Kate's loved ones are serving a life sentence, one that they will never be free from. As Kate's father, Alan, said, "I still feel empty and cold, and I will never lose that feeling." Kate was so lively and energetic. How must it have felt to be brutally struck down in those final seconds? Many people's lives have been permanently altered by the utter fear and perplexity of the effects of this vicious and barbaric attack. For the remainder of her music life, my wife sees nothing but emptiness and is unable to find solace in anything. We sincerely appreciate all of our viewers and customers, and we hope you will think about becoming a part of our small Patreon community. It helps us as a channel, and we are so grateful to anyone who helps us. You also get early access to Adre and behind-the-scenes access to additional episodes.